Welcome to Sword of Laban, where we seek greater light and truth and have fun. In this series, we've been following the many breadcrumbs to see how Nephi the son of Helaman, Lehi his brother, and Samuel the Lamanite may have been the wise men that visited the Christ child. Click up here for the first video if you haven't already seen that, and then come on back. No Christmas PJs dancing today, sorry. You should be so lucky. It's been a long day of gingerbread house making and candy eating, and I just don't have the energy left. You know, Christmas is rough that way, right? Okay, let's dive in. In this video, we're going to talk about when these prophets may have left the New World. In the next video, we'll talk about when they probably arrived in the Old World and what they did when they got there, like falling down to worship him, which is a very Nephite thing to do. Okay, so I have no expertise in long ocean journeys, and I'm not going to attempt to do like PhD research on the topic, but I'll offer a few ideas. And we're just looking to get like in the right order of magnitude. We want to guess how long a journey might have taken them. And we also want to know roughly what time they left and see if those two numbers match. So first, how long might it have taken them? So there was a boat built in the early 2000s called the Phoenician. It was a boat apparently built using traditional ancient Phoenician techniques to prove that Phoenicians could have sailed around Africa, and later to prove that a boat like that could cross the Atlantic. And here's the path it took. Yes, the Nephites weren't Phoenicians, but in the absence of a Nephite boat, it's reasonable to assume that the expertise was broadly similar, since both peoples traveled great distances. Anyway, let's look at the Atlantic voyage that was done in 2019. It traveled roughly 5,000 miles in roughly 90 days. So that's 56 miles a day. Let's just say 50 miles a day to allow for stop-offs and just to round off the number. Let's compare that to the number that the author Brian Holt gives in the book I described in part 1 of this video series. He estimates 100 miles a day. Okay, and for fun, a completely different data point, but let's compare with my own grandmother, who came from Scotland to New Zealand in the early 20th century on a modern boat at something like 200 miles a day. But of course there are so many variables here with very few data points, and it's hard to know exactly. But let's just use the 50 miles per day number for now as more conservative, and we know we might still be off by a factor of 2 in either direction, right? So now let's look at how long each of the 3 paths from the previous video was. Path 1. This is something like 17,500 miles. And here I have them coming up the Red Sea and then the Gulf of Aqaba to get as close as possible to Jerusalem. Yes, they're approaching Jerusalem from the south, and they're even passing right by Bethlehem on their way, but they would still likely tell Herod that they came from the east. Because guess what? They just spent many, many months on a boat traveling in the general direction that makes them come from the east. And who cares what direction the last few miles were when you're traveling that far, right? Even worst case, without camels and just walking, that would have only taken a week or so. Anyway, around 17,500 miles on a boat at 50 miles a day is about a year. Maybe not the most fun year of your life, right? It would have been mostly spent watching the waves go by day after day. Now path 2. This is something like 7,500 miles. And here this line is curved because it's the shortest distance on a globe. It just looks curved on this map projection. So I have them approaching this shore very close to Jerusalem. And at 50 miles a day, this ocean voyage would have taken 6 months. Now path 3 takes them in a more circuitous route around Africa, 16,000 miles, which is a similar length to path 1. So let's put roughly a year for that too. For this one, I've actually put the final port right here at Kuwait, right at the end of the Persian Gulf. And I did that so that they could approach Jerusalem from the east. Yes, they've been traveling west, but if we have them come up the Red Sea, like is shown here in the crossed out red line, then there's no way they can say they came from the east, because they've traveled generally west and now are approaching Jerusalem from the south. So there's no east in sight, right? On the downside, having them land at Kuwait would have added like 1,000 miles of road travel depending on which roads they took. Maybe they just sold their ship and bought camels, which could get them something like 100 miles a day on a camelback. So that's something like half a month of travel overland from Kuwait to Jerusalem. So in conclusion, paths 1 and 3 might take roughly a year, and path 2 might take roughly half a year. But this is all with the caveat that we might be off by a factor of 2 or more in either direction. Now we have to ask when they might have left and see if that lines up. In Helaman 16 it says, Samuel cast himself down from the wall and was never heard of again. and thus ended the 86th year. So let's keep track right here on the side of what happens when. Now in the 87th through 89th year, it talks about how the people were bad. Bad, mostly bad, that is. Now in the 90th year, it gets interesting. Angels did appear unto men, wise men, and to declare unto them glad tidings of great joy. So there's some very specific wording here. Thus in this year the scriptures began to be fulfilled. Now in 3 Nephi 1:3 it says that the 91st year had passed away, and Nephi the son of Helaman had departed out of the land of Zarahemla, giving charge unto his son Nephi of the sacred things. And then he departed out of the land, and then came the commencement of the 92nd year, right, as you see down here at the bottom. So what year did he leave? Well, you could read that center yellow bit alone and say, well, he was gone before the 91st year because it's past tense, right? But look, so is the top yellow bit. That's also in past tense. In fact, these two lines seem to parallel each other. And the middle yellow bit is sandwiched between the top and the bottom yellow bit, as if it happened in the 91st year. Anyway, if you read this, as well as the previous chapter, which is the last chapter of Helaman, to me it seems like he actually departed in the 91st year. And also, I tend to think that if he actually departed in the 86th, 87th, 88th, 89th, or 90th year, well, Mormon the editor probably would have said this important detail during his multiple verse descriptions of those years, rather than just throwing in this detail about Nephi disappearing as past tense later on and making it vague. Mormon is otherwise pretty precise about things. Okay, then, so in the start of the 92nd year, the prophecies began to be fulfilled more fully. Then the unbelievers say the time is past and they'll kill the believers after a certain day, so they're in trouble. Now Nephi, the son of Nephi, the brand new prophet and brand new high priest, prays mightily, and then Christ is born, and it says at the going down of the sun there was no darkness, and it came to pass also that a new star did appear. Thus the 92nd year did pass away. Now in the part 2 video, I said that the wise men saw the star while they were in the New World, before they even set out. That's possible. It's also possible that they rocked up to Kuwait or somewhere and they landed east of Jerusalem, and then they saw the star, and then they went to Jerusalem. So there's multiple possibilities here. In fact, I'll argue in the next video that they arrived to Bethlehem just a couple weeks late. As we saw on the maps at the beginning of this video, they actually had a couple of weeks of land travel at the end, depending on where they landed. So, I don't know, maybe the star showed up when they landed, and they saw it, and off they went to Jerusalem. Now it's story time. Let's imagine that guy that might have traded them camels. He comes home excited one day. "Darling, I'm home, and you'll never guess what happened today." So, there I was, feeding my camels by the seashore, and this strange-looking boat came into dock. I've never seen anything like it. And these people came out, and they said they'd trade their boat for my 6 camels. Can you believe it? A boat for 6 camels? Camels are worth like what, 50 shekels? But I can sell this boat for 500. Well, those suckers, they really got the raw end of a deal. And they had this funny accent, and I didn't understand everything, but they were really excited, and they kept pointing at the sky. I don't know, dear, it was all a bit strange. But hey, tonight, let's feast. The gods have smiled on us. And that was Storytime, sponsored by Sword of Laban. Now let's put it all together. They left in the 91st year. They arrived a couple or few weeks after Christ's birth, which is the 92nd year. But we don't know if it was the start or the end of the year for those data points, either the departure or the arrival. So let's draw this out. In these, I've listed our modern months along the top. The blue squares represent the 91st year. The yellow squares represent the 92nd year. The E and the L mean the earliest and the latest that they could have departed to still leave in the 91st year. And the X means Christ's birth on or near April 6th. And by the way, this April 6th date is way more interesting than just that one verse in D and C. There's a lot more detail. If you want me to do a video about the April 6th date and share everything that I've learned about it, let me know in the comments. Okay, for fun, let's just assume that the Nephites started the year around the start of winter like we do. Then, if you count squares from the E or the L to the X, then you get 4 to 15 months. But of course, the first month of the Nephite year could be anything. So next I show the two extremes. Let's assume that our April was the first month of the year. Well, then we get 1 to 13 months of travel, from the E to the X or from the L to the X respectively. And lastly, let's assume that our April is the last month of the Nephite year. Well, then we get 13 to 24 months of travel, from the E or L to the X. It's still pretty constrained. On the short end, it's 1 month, but that's not practical anyway from a standpoint of how many miles they had to travel. So let's lengthen that to 4 at a bare minimum, if they can sail faster than I estimated earlier, of course. On the longest of the long end is 24 months, and it wouldn't be unusual for the year to start in spring or winter like the first 2 cases, since that's the time of renewal, so let's just use that 4 to 15 months as a reasonable estimate, and I'm guessing more towards the higher end of that scale to give them plenty of travel time. Okay, that's it. Tune in next time where I talk about why they might have arrived a couple weeks late and not a couple years late, and the significance of that with the Festival of Weeks and the required days of purification for mother and child. But for now, this is Sword of Laban, out.